You know, when you think of Finland today, you probably picture one of the happiest places on Earth, right? But that peaceful reputation was actually forged in a really brutal past, a time when the nation was poor, isolated, and for 5 long months every year, literally a prisoner of ice. It's a past that can be summed up by one single catastrophic number: 130,000. That is a huge number. That's how many Finns died from starvation and disease back in the mid-19th century. We're talking about nearly 8% of the entire population at the time, just wiped out. And the killer? It wasn't a war, it wasn't some new plague, it was simply winter. So what happened? Well, back in 1867, winter just decided to stick around a little longer than usual. That tiny delay was all it took to completely destroy the year's harvest. And to make a horrible situation even worse, the Baltic Sea froze solid, trapping the very relief ships that were filled with grain on their way to save them. The Finns were literally trapped in a frozen tomb. So after burying their dead, the Finns basically made a collective vow: never again. That one decision, born from this unimaginable loss, set them on a 150-year journey. They weren't just going to survive the ice anymore, they were going to master it. So how on earth did this national trauma turn a small, isolated nation into the undisputed global superpower of a technology that giants like America, Russia, and China are now desperate to get their hands on? That famine in 1867, it was a brutal wake-up call. It became crystal clear that their entire future depended on one thing and one thing only: finding a way to break out of their winter prison. But how? Well, the choice they faced would end up defining their very existence. The country found itself at this massive crossroads, staring down two completely different paths to security. One of them offered immediate relief, but the other was a really risky gamble on true freedom. Okay, so here's the deal. Path one was the simple choice: build a railway east to Russia. It was a quick fix for food security. Path two was a total moonshot: develop some radical new technology, these things called icebreakers, to forge a sea route west to the rich markets of Britain and Germany. It was crazy expensive, totally uncertain, but it was the only real path to economic independence. So what did they do? Well, first, they chose survival. It makes sense, right? By 1870, the railway to Russia was up and running. And you know what? It worked. The immediate threat of starvation was gone. But it definitely came at a cost. Finland, which was a part of the Russian Empire at the time, was now even more tied to its powerful neighbor, selling its goods at a discount and watching that dream of independence kind of fade away. But that dream of breaking the ice, it didn't die. Not at all. It just started small. The first attempts were clumsy, they were underpowered, but they were absolutely essential first steps on this long journey. The first steps were baby steps. In 1877, they launched a ship called the Express, which was basically just a reinforced boat that could kind of nudge small chunks of ice out of the way. A start, but not a real solution. The real turning point came in 1889. A group of frustrated business leaders actually paid for a powerful Danish icebreaker, the Braderin, to come and put on a show. And the sight of this beast smashing through the frozen harbor was so dramatic, so convincing, that the government was immediately sold. The very next year, they ordered their own, the Mertaja, which means the breaker. Now, the Mertaja was the biggest, most expensive ship Finland had ever bought. It was based on the best European tech, designed to ride up on the ice and crush it with its sheer weight. And it kind of worked, in mild winters. But when the Baltic froze really hard, it was basically useless. This massive failure was called out in a fiery report by a young engineer, Robert Runeberg. He argued that the European solution just wasn't good enough for them. He insisted there had to be a better way. And you know what? Runeberg was right. The answer wasn't in Europe. To find it, Finland had to look all the way across the Atlantic, to a place facing a very similar challenge on its own massive frozen Great Lakes: America. So Finland's government sent an engineer named Karl Bunstorff to the Chicago World's Fair. He wasn't there as a tourist, though. He was basically a technology scout. And there, he discovered this radical new design by an American named Frank Kirby. Now get this. Instead of just pushing the ice, Kirby's ships had a second propeller at the front. This propeller would suck the water out from underneath the ice sheet, weakening it just moments before the hole smashed through. It was brilliant. Bunstorff knew this was the answer. He copied the blueprints and raced back home. The result of that trip was a ship called the Sampo.
Built in 1898, it was an absolute game changer. I mean, this thing was so powerful it could smash through ice over 6 meters thick. In its very first season, it kept the port of Hanko open for the entire winter and helped 128 ships get to safety. Finland had finally found the key to its prison.
But finding the key is one thing. Building an entire industry around it is something else entirely. And paradoxically, it was the absolute devastation of 20th century warfare that would transform Finland from just a buyer of icebreakers into the world's premier builder.
See, these icebreakers quickly became strategic weapons. During Finland's own civil war, the Sampo was ferrying troops and supplies, helping to secure the nation's independence. But after World War II, disaster struck again. Finland, on the losing side against the Soviet Union, was hit with crippling war reparations. A huge chunk of that debt had to be paid in ships, which forced them to hand over their best icebreakers to their former enemy and then build them dozens more.
Now, this could have been the end of the story, but it was actually a new beginning. This forced production rapidly upgraded Finland's shipyards and factories. So when the reparations finally ended in 1952, the Finnish shipbuilder Wärtsilä did something absolutely genius. Instead of stopping, they went to the Soviets and said, hey, how about we keep building these amazing ships for you? But this time, you pay us? The Soviets, who desperately needed the ships for their huge Arctic coastline, agreed. Just like that, a punishment had been turned into a globally dominant business.
So what is it that allows Finland to stay on top of this game today? Well, it's not one single thing. It's a whole ecosystem, a secret formula that is incredibly difficult for any other country to copy.
This formula really has 3 key pillars. First, you've got the brains, a company called Aker Arctic. They operate this massive indoor lake that they can freeze to perfectly simulate any ice condition on Earth. It's wild. Second, you've got the hands, the Helsinki shipyard, with over 150 years of continuous generational experience building ships for the ice. And third, you've got the shield, the Finnish government itself, which owns major stakes in these companies and actually blocks foreign takeovers to make sure this strategic technology never leaves the country. And the results of this formula, just look at the numbers. Today, an incredible 80% of all the icebreakers operating in the entire world were designed in Finland, and 60% of them were physically built in Finnish shipyards. It's simple. When any country, including the United States, needs a real, serious icebreaker, the first door they knock on is Finland's. It's a truly remarkable story when you think about it. Here's a nation that began as a completely helpless victim, literally trapped and starving because of a frozen sea, and has transformed itself through tragedy, risk, and just sheer ingenuity into the undisputed global master of the ice. That is a stunning reversal of fortune, which kind of leaves us with one final thought. Finland's story really shows how a nation can turn its greatest vulnerability into its absolute greatest strength. And it makes you wonder, what are the frozen seas, the seemingly impossible challenges that we all face today? And what kind of radical new thinking might be the key to breaking through?